get you back inside the courtroom for more opening statements in the fugitive sex offender trial of Nicholas Rossi. Right now, we're going to hear from the defense.
I love going to the thrift store. I love the smell in the air. I love putting on my headphones and going up and down the aisles and looking for my next treasure. And it's not just clothes or shoes or a funky lamp. The thrift store is actually a great place to get puzzles. I don't know if you guys knew that. It can burn you though. I've been burned by getting a puzzle at the thrift store before. I was there at Savers. It's a cute little puzzle box I see. It's got a cross-stitch dog on it. I grab it, I bring it home, I start going through my puzzle, and as I'm going through, I'm trying to find the corner pieces, and they're not really there. I'm going through the pieces, and I see pieces that look like they're from a different puzzle, and that's weird. And I'm searching, I'm trying to put this border together, and finally I realize, this is an old puzzle. Not all the pieces are here. I'm not gonna get a complete picture. And I say all of that to say, not just to give you a warning about buying a puzzle next time you're at Savers. I say all that to say, that's what this case is like. This case is like an old puzzle from the thrift store. It's 13 years old. Not all the pieces are there. Some pieces are from a different puzzle. And when you start going through everything, you're not going to get a complete picture. The state wants you to believe two different stories this week. Two different stories from two different women, both stories of rape. The first story, you've already heard a little bit about. You've heard a characterization of it. But just imagine this with me for a moment. The first story is of 26. She's kind of at the peak of her young adulthood, just getting started, getting things going. And at that peak, she gets into an accident that leaves her with a serious brain injury, a TBI. She has to stop. She has to pause. All of that momentum she had, she has to take a break and heal. And so she's cooped up at her parents' house, she's with mom and dad, and just a couple months, 2 months after that brain injury, an injury that she has for the rest of her life, she decides to start dating again. And she goes on Craigslist, and she finds a classified, and she answers it. It's Nick's classified. And what happens after that can only be described as sort of a whirlwind romance. Something that you really only hear of in Utah County or on the show 90 Day Fiancé. She meets Nick on her 27th birthday, and that meeting must go pretty well, because 7 days later, he's coming to Thanksgiving with her family. And the day after that, on Black Friday, they go get rings. And they become engaged to be married. But like all relationships that start off that fast, it fizzles. They start fighting. They start disagreeing about if they really should get married. They both start to have second thoughts. She gets upset about the debt that she has from the rings. She files a small claims court case. She changes her number twice. They drift apart. They don't hear from each other again. Until 13 years later, and she's watching the news, and she sees Nick on the news. And she says, "Hey, that's the guy. That's my crappy ex-boyfriend. The one who wasted my time in my 20s, the one who made me pay for things, made me pay for our own engagement rings, the one that saddled me with that debt. That's him." And she gets angry. And those years of rage and resentment, it starts to bubble up. And she calls the police, and she says, "That's the guy that raped me." 13 years later, she says that. You're not gonna have a police report from 2008. You're not gonna have an exact date. I don't think you're really gonna know exactly where it happened. You're just gonna have some information from 2022 and some random puzzle pieces the state are gonna throw at you. The second story is from in Utah County, and she's gonna tell you a different story about rape. And in her story, you're gonna get to hear her talk about it. And you're gonna get to hear her talk about how it was different, how she talked to the police. Multiple times she was interviewed. You're gonna hear from two of those police. You're gonna hear from an officer who interviewed her. You're gonna hear that officer testify that she never sent the charges to be screened. You're gonna hear from another officer. That officer is gonna testify that Nick alleged that he raped him. You're gonna hear that. You're also gonna hear he never sent charges to be screened either.
All right, let's bring in our guest for this hour. Joining us to discuss, excuse me, attorney and former prosecutor Randolph Rice is with us. Randolph, great to have you as always. Thank you so much for joining me on the program. And first and foremost, the thing that jumps out at me is optics always matter. You're in a rape case, you're a male, you have a female representing you. I gotta say the message coming out from this that maybe she was acting out of rage, resentment, or even revenge certainly will sound better coming from a woman than they would a man.
Oh, absolutely, Michael. I think you're right. When it comes to optics, you certainly want to have maybe a softer look on that, and I think that this defense attorney certainly provides that. And I also like her opening statement about the puzzle pieces. I might even use it in my next opening statement. You know, she puts together some doubt in the minds of that jurors that this is just not a case that the prosecution can prove.
Yeah, it was like, basically she said it was a puzzle from from a secondhand store. There's pieces missing in this case. One of the things that I think is going to jump out to this jury is something that the state, I think, has to get over, is this idea that, in fact, it did take her 13 years to point this out. Now, they did point out that there was an outcry to the parents, but again, it is the parents, so we'll see what else they have. But clearly, what's going to be super important for the state here, Randolph, is to find some support for her story, because you gotta say, this whirlwind romance, the fact that she didn't report it for 13 years, those things are gonna work against them in trying to get a conviction here.
You're exactly right. And the fact that, you know, late report is always bad for prosecutors. They fear that because when you have so much time go by, you often say to yourself, what is the jury gonna think about this time that's passed? Are they gonna doubt the relationship? And then you've got the defense bringing up that there's potential maybe mental health issues with the complaining witness. So the prosecution certainly has a tough case here today.
Now, one other thing they've done is it looks like they're bringing in one of his exes, another one of his exes, to come in and testify to a situation that at least the defense says is somewhat similar, but there are a lot of differences. One of them being that she goes to the police. How important is that to the state's case? This idea they have this other person, again, it's really a fine line, right? You can't just bring people in to say he has a propensity to do this, because again, it doesn't look like the modus operandi is the exact same thing. So what do you make of that witness coming in for the state?
Yeah, that feels like a reach for the state. You know, prior bad acts are typically, you know, in most cases, they're often excluded in trials. That this was litigated at some point, the defense saying this shouldn't come in, but the judge felt that it was at least consistent enough with the current charges. So prior bad acts can be helpful for prosecutors, but jurors may say, you know what, that's just a one-off, or it's not consistent or not the same story, so we're really not going to give it much weight.